Avi, as we walk, you see behind us a tank from either, who knows, the Six-Day War in 1967, the Yom Kippur War in 1973. The tank behind us, an Israeli tank, been left there, kind of a memento, I guess, memorial from that conflict. But since we're in range of Damascus, Avi, I think this is a good place to kind of tie it all together. Look, you talked about the profound impact on the region, on Israel, of this conflict in Syria. Let's take a bit of a global view now, if we can. Number one, I want to ask you about President Trump's recent Tomahawk missile strikes in Syria. Was that a game changer?
Yes, it is a game changer. The most important essence of that signal is very clear. The United States is back in the Syrian scene. The meaning of that any kind of future arrangement in Syria must take into consideration the strategic interest of the United States of America. It is not taken for given, because that was not the case in the time of Obama.
Yeah, Avi, we couldn't say that over the past 8 years, I'm sorry. Assad, Iran, Vladimir Putin's Russia, they were doing whatever they wanted to do. They didn't fear repercussions from the US, but those Tomahawk missile strikes send a message, maybe a new sheriff in town?
Yes.
You know, the U.S. left a vacuum in the region, Avi, for 8 years, and that vacuum was filled by the worst actors in the world, and hopefully that Tomahawk missile is a game changer. Okay, that brings us to number two, Russia. Vladimir Putin has a presence here in the Middle East for the first time in decades. The Russians are here in a major way. What's their goal here? What's their game?
Well, you know, Eric, if there is a winner in that terrible, tragic scene called Syria, it is Vladimir Putin, because Putin, in a relatively low investment, you know, he was killing a couple of thousands of Syrians and he was ruining a couple of cities. He couldn't care less. He basically got himself a stronghold in Syria, and Putin is here to stay. As far as Putin is concerned, the cards that he holds in the context of Syria are enormously significant, not only because it enables Russia an access to the eastern basin of the Mediterranean with everything that comes along with that.
Warm water port.
Yes, but it also provides Putin with a very, very significant bargaining card in the context of Eastern Europe. Putin is in Syria to stay. Putin holds the cards to any kind of political arrangement in Syria. President Trump understands that. Yeah. The Turks understand that. The Iranians understand that. Saudi Arabia understands that. The Syrians understand it.
It makes me shudder to think, Avi, that Russia, which is a nuclear powerhouse, no longer a superpower, but look, a massive, massive nuclear arsenal, is shoulder to shoulder with Islamic terrorists. The Iranian regime and Hezbollah aligned with them. That's a scary thought. Okay, number three, last thought here, the refugee crisis. Now, the Syrian refugee crisis obviously has touched the West in a major way. We've seen, look, ISIS sympathizers come out of there and everything else, carry out attacks in the West. Tell us about that refugee crisis ongoing, what's the latest there, and how it affects the West, why we should care over there.
Well, in fact, Eric, if you just look down there beyond the fence, which is very close, you could see these white tents scattered all around. These are tents populated by Syrians who basically flee from the regular homes, trying to find a shelter from the war. This is, of course, a small example. Yeah. When we talk about the phenomenon of the Syrian refugees and dislocated, roughly speaking, we are talking about some 5 million Syrian refugees outside of Syria, in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Turkey, and elsewhere. We are talking about 7 or 8 million Syrians dislocated inside Syria. Syria is ruined now.
A country that had been 21 million people,
23 million
over half
people.
of the country is now dispersed.
Correct.
23, I'm sorry.
Correct.
And you just said it, Avi, Syria is ruined. Syria has ceased to exist as a nation state.
One of the things that we should be alarmed of is that there are many of these Syrians who flee Syria, and they hold to a large extent the West responsible for the tragedy that happens to them. The meaning of that is that we don't know the exact number of people that are basically what I call the ticking bomb, meaning the people that may go to the West and at some point down the road will be fueled with the sentiments of anger and rage, and that could be manifested in a ways that nobody can really predict. This is something that we have to be very much aware of, and mostly because of the fact that on a daily basis, people from different parts of the Arab world, and of course Syria, are exposed to a terrible sceneries coming from Syria, which most of the people in the West are not exposed to. Yeah. Nobody knows what the impact of those sceneries on the sense of the feeling of anger and feelings of revenge among those Syrians.
And then they come to the West and they lash out in places like London, Brussels, Paris, and the rest. Avi, what you're telling us is that what happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East.
Coming up,
What is the end game in Syria? We discuss it after the break. Don't move.